She felt the carpet yield softly under her sneakers as if the aisle were a slow river, and she stood in the current, unsure whether to wade forward or turn back. Emily Carter held her first-class ticket with both hands, the paper warm now from her grip, the black print of 1A fixed and undeniable. Her brown hair was loosely tied at the back, a few strands escaping and catching the sanitizer bright light, and her wide hazel eyes flicked between the seat that bore her number and the man already in it. He lounged as if he belonged to the plane more than anyone else on board, one ankle hooked over a knee, a suit that looked like it knew its way around private rooms, and a smirk resting easy on his face. He didn't look at the ticket in her hands. He looked at her the way a person looks at a raindrop that dares fall on their sleeve. Around them, the cabin was a rustle of magazines and the soft clink of glass, that hush of privilege that says nothing bad can happen here, because nothing bad is allowed to exist within this price point. The seatback screens purred loops of advertisement, champagne poured in slow motion, a skyline sliding beneath a wingtip. Emily stayed quiet. She wasn't good at making her voice go loud in rooms where adults were already sure about everything. She had learned, without anyone telling her, that silence sometimes made things worse, but almost never made them better. Still, it was the only tool she owned that didn't tremble in her hand. The flight attendant came with a cart that smelled like citrus and metal, her name tag reading Sophie in tidy letters. Sophie's smile was the kind that could be attached or removed like a lanyard. She followed Emily's gaze to the ticket, then to the seat, and for a fleeting second, something like recognition crossed her face. The quick audit of the boarding manifest, the memory of a minor flagged for special handling, the training slide about dignity and de-escalation. "Sir, she said, arm lifting in a polite directive that floated somewhere between request and suggestion. "This seat is assigned." The man barely turned his head. He was handsome in the athletic way of men who find the gym a reasonable church, his jaw working once as if on a thought. "To a child?" he said, the French in his vowels rolling his disdain in butter. "First class isn't a playground." The sentence was shaped like a joke, but it landed like a shove. Sophie's hand hovered above the headrest, her finger indicating the printed 1A as if numbers could argue for themselves. "Regulations permit minors in first class," she recited, but the words left her mouth with the thinness of paper, not the weight of a rule. Emily watched her, watched the effort fail to gather muscle, watched the way the attendant's eyes darted not to Emily for courage, but to the man for permission. Around them, the air tuned itself to discomfort, a cough that didn't need to happen. A magazine page turned too carefully, someone pretending to study the wine list as though it were a difficult scripture. The man, Richard, according to the gold monogram on his carry-on, shifted deeper into the seat, reached with leisurely precision for the overhead light, and clicked it on as if staking a flag. Emily stayed where she was, by the armrest, her ticket still up like a small white shield. She did not cry. She did not stamp a foot. She did what children do when the map they've been given suddenly erases a road. She looked up for a landmark. Sophie exhaled, the kind of sigh that belongs to people who think problems are puddles you step around. "Let's not delay boarding," she murmured, and the passive voice did the quiet violence. No subject, no culprit, just time itself to blame. She bent toward Emily, careful to keep gentleness visible. "We can find you another place to sit for now, sweetheart." The endearment was a bandage offered before looking at the wound. A man in 1C closed his eyes and leaned back as if he had witnessed a disturbance and chosen sleep as a vote. A woman touched the pearls at her neck as though they could calibrate the room. The overhead bin hummed shut, and the wing outside the window held steady, aloof as a horizon. John Carter arrived without announcement, tall enough to change the geometry of the aisle simply by standing in it. There was nothing loud about him. Even his presence seemed padded, like the carpet. He glanced down at his daughter first, then at the ticket, then at the seated man, and then at Sophie, whose smile tried to become a structure again. "We're resolving it," she said, as if that were a promise and not a hope. John's face did not darken or harden. It settled, the way a hand settles on a table before writing something that will matter. He knelt briefly so his eyes were level with Emily's. She offered him the ticket. He didn't take it. He put a warm hand over her fingers instead, steadying the small tremors that hadn't made it to her eyes. "We'll sit for a bit somewhere else," he said, voice low. The calm that comes before storm only if one believes a storm is always next. He looked at Sophie, not unkindly, and something in that look was a ledger closing. Then he stood, and with no theater at all, turned their small procession away from the front of the plane. They walked back through the curtain that always pretends it is a wall, past seats that narrowed and armrests that argued with elbows, past a family negotiating a car seat and a businessman who kept typing through turbulence that had not yet begun. In the last row, near the restroom where the door latch clicks like a metronome, they found 2 open seats that were not really open so much as unclaimed by anyone who had a better option. The fabric scratched a little when Emily sat. The window back here was smaller, and what it showed wasn't a skyline or a wingtip, but the bright concrete snaking with fuel lines like veins. Emily held the ticket on her lap the way people in old paintings hold flowers. Precious, emblematic, and slightly tragic. She could still feel the other seat in the front, the one upholstered in more than cloth, upholstered in opinion. But her eyes didn't glass. They just widened around the edges, like a lake taking in more sky. John buckled in, then glanced at his phone only once, the check of a pilot, eyeing an instrument. No call, no dramatic reach for authority. His thumb moved with the economy of a man who knows that words in the wrong place cost more than money. He typed 3 characters, N17, and pressed send. Somewhere he couldn't see, the message would translate into some other motion. A key turning, a door closing, a hand hovering over a switch. He put the phone away without looking for a reply. Beside him, Emily watched the condensation at the edge of the window gather itself into a bead and then surrender to gravity, a whole weather system rendered on plexiglass. "Is that man going to give back the seat?" she asked. Not a plea, not a complaint, just a small citizen's inquiry. John turned his head, and his smile was a quiet bridge. "We're exactly where we need to be for the moment," he said. It was not an answer, but it was true. First class resumed its rituals without admitting they had been interrupted. The hiss of a bottle opening traveled faintly down the aisle like gossip. In 1A, Richard accepted champagne with a nod that made the attendant complicit in his comfort. He tapped out a message on his phone, head tilted, lips curving at something only he could read. In the galley, Sophie stared too long at a laminated card that did not change while she looked at it. She remembered, against her will, the training vignette with the child holding a ticket in a shaking airport. De-escalate by honoring assignment, not status. The sentence had slid through her earlier like a coin through water. Now, it lodged. She tucked a strand of hair behind her ear and told herself the situation had been handled. Delays were expensive. Complaints were acid. They burned and left a smell. But the image of Emily's eyes, open but obedient, stayed where she couldn't set it down. In the economy cabin, the announcements began their liturgy. Seatbelts, seatbacks, electronics. A cartoon plane traced a white line on the safety card like a child drawing breath across a map. The engine hum deepened, a bass note that promised forward. Emily leaned into the sound. It felt like the part of a song she knew even if she didn't know why. Across the aisle, a young man with a denim jacket and a camera bag, the kind of passenger who likes to catch sunsets and serendipities, lifted his phone, hesitated, and lowered it again. His name was Marco, and he was good at reading rooms. This one said, "Don't." He put the phone away, then pulled it back out to check his booking app for no reason except to do something. The manifest snapped into view. 1A, Emily Carter. His eyes moved to the back row. He saw the girl with the ticket on her lap, the father with the untroubled brow, the way indignity can sit quietly and still be heavy. He didn't record anything. He took a screenshot and let the truth live in pixels for a while. The plane pushed back from the gate. The wing flexed like a muscle making up its mind. Emily rested her forehead against the cool oval of the window, her breath fogging the edge. Through the blur, she could see a vehicle moving on the tarmac, lights revolving in patient circles. Men in reflective vests moved like punctuation in a sentence too long to parse. She swallowed once, the kind of swallow that tightens a child's throat when a big world forgets she is small. John's hand covered hers again, and his palm was that same good temperature as before, the one that makes thermometers irrelevant. He didn't say we'll fix it or they'll pay or even it will be okay. He said nothing at all, and in that nothing was a long, straight road. Far forward, a curtain lifted and fell with some unseen transit. Somewhere a printer in the jet bridge came to life, its teeth worrying a strip of paper. A door that had been considered closed considered a different argument. Emily didn't know any of this. What she knew was that the seatbelt pressed across her thighs felt like a line drawn in pencil, soft but definite. That people with uniforms sometimes spoke to other people with uniforms in voices that tried not to be heard. That when adults are wrong, no alarm goes off. Only a new quiet starts. She blinked, and the tear that might have fallen retreated in the same moment it was born, as if even her sadness understood this wasn't the time to take up space. The plane paused, the way a sentence pauses before the word that changes its meaning. Engines breathed in. Time held its breath. In 1A, Richard tilted his glass to catch the light, as pleased with the sparkle as if he had invented refraction. In the last row, Emily lifted the ticket a little closer to her chest and studied the block letters of her name, as though reassurance might be printed on the same line as entitlement. John looked at the aisle and saw not carpet but pathways, the ways a situation can travel from incident to instruction, from slight to standard, from one child's seat to a system's posture. He let his eyes close for a count of 3, like a swimmer measuring a wave, and then opened them again on the world he was still in charge of making safe. The aircraft nudged forward. The safety video pressed on with its smiling masks and floating seat cushions. The cabin settled into its choreography of almost leaving. Emily breathed with it. 1, 2, 3. And when she exhaled, a new sound threaded the hum. Heels on carpet, deliberate, unhurried, not belonging to service or impatience, but to purpose. She didn't know yet what footsteps could do in a story. She only knew that they were coming toward the back, and that the ticket in her hands remained the same stubborn truth it had been when all of this began. Emily sat back in the cramped economy seat, the ticket still on her lap like a stubborn truth. Her father's hand rested over hers, warm and steady. The hum of the engines was a constant backdrop, but inside her small chest, a quieter, more uncertain rhythm played. She was old enough to know something unfair had happened, but too young to name the rules that had been bent around her. John Carter leaned back, his posture one of ease, but it was a performance. Every muscle was in a state of quiet readiness, as if the air itself could shift without warning. He'd spent decades reading rooms where politeness was camouflage and silence could save lives. The lesson had come early. Not all battles are fought where they start. He glanced down at his daughter. "We're okay," he said simply. Not a lecture, not a promise to fix everything in public, just a gentle anchor against the drift of her thoughts. Emily nodded, but her wide hazel eyes stayed fixed on the ticket. From his jacket pocket, John slid out his phone. There was no flourish, no obvious urgency. His thumb typed 3 characters, N17 confirmed, and hit send. It was the kind of message that meant nothing to anyone watching, but would land in the right hands like a key fitting a lock. Somewhere, an entirely different chain of events would begin. He locked the phone and slipped it back into his pocket, not glancing at the screen to see if there was a reply. In his work, confirmation didn't arrive with the chime of a message. It arrived in actions taken by people whose names he might never know. 2 rows ahead, a young man in a worn denim jacket was scrolling on his phone. Marco had the restless energy of a traveler who couldn't quite settle in. even before the plane had left the ground. He glanced over his booking app, not looking for trouble but finding it anyway. Seat 1A, Emily Carter. He blinked, looked down the aisle toward the back of the plane, and saw her there. The little girl with the ticket on her lap, her father beside her, both sitting in the last row like they had bought the cheapest seats on the plane. Marco's jaw tightened. He wasn't the kind of person to make a scene, but the screenshot he took was sharp, clear. Facts have a way of traveling when they need to. Across the aisle, in seat 38D, an older woman watched Emily with a mix of sadness and something else. Regret. Evelyn had boarded just ahead of the Carters in the terminal, catching a glimpse of the girl's careful step beside her father. She'd noticed the ticket in Emily's hand then too, and the way her eyes seemed to take in everything without judgment. Now those same eyes looked a little heavier. Evelyn shifted in her seat. She'd seen moments like this before in her long career, moments when people decided, with no official authority, who belonged where. She thought about standing up, about walking forward and saying something. But the memory of Richard's confident smirk and the flight attendant's half-hearted defense was enough to keep her in place, for now. She told herself it was better not to make things worse. She told herself there would be another moment. Emily leaned toward the small oval of the window, but there wasn't much to see except the slow movement of vehicles on the tarmac. She glanced at her father, the question already forming. "Why didn't you?" she started. John smiled faintly. "Because sometimes the best way to be heard is to wait until the room is listening." It wasn't the answer she expected, but it was the only one he was willing to give in this space. His voice carried no resentment, no edge, just calm, deliberate patience. Up in first class, Richard shifted in his seat, lifting his glass of champagne with a satisfaction that had nothing to do with the drink itself. Sophie moved down the aisle, offering practiced smiles to other passengers, but her eyes flicked forward more often than she meant them to. She hadn't told anyone about the miner's VIP flag on the manifest. She told herself she'd done it to avoid a scene. She told herself there was no real harm, but she knew deep down she'd taken the easier side, not the right one. John's phone buzzed once in his pocket. He didn't take it out. He didn't need to. The signal wasn't for him. It was for the system he'd quietly set in motion. Emily turned back from the window, tucking her legs up slightly. "I like that seat," she said softly. "I know," John replied. "And you'll have it again when it matters most." It sounded like a promise, but in his mind it was a certainty. Not because he would argue or threaten, but because forces already moving would make it so. In seat 38D, Evelyn reached for the small notebook she always carried. The page stayed blank for a moment before she wrote just one line. "It starts small, and it always matters." Marco closed his booking app and opened his notes. He typed the seat number and Emily's name, along with the time. Not for social media, not yet, but for record. Around them, the economy cabin settled into the shallow comfort of pre-departure. The engines deepened their hum, and the safety announcements began again. Emily glanced at the ticket one more time before sliding it carefully into the seat back pocket, as if putting it there might keep it safe. John watched her do it, and for the first time since boarding, he let himself exhale fully. The waiting was the hardest part, but it was also where the groundwork was laid. He knew that before this flight reached its destination, the balance in this cabin, and maybe a few reputations, would shift. And when it happened, it would look to everyone else like it came out of nowhere. In the insulated hush of first class, Richard Duval's laughter rose like a warm draft. It wasn't loud enough to break the etiquette of the cabin, but it carried a certain resonance, the kind that invites attention without needing to demand it. He was holding court over a glass of champagne, its pale gold surface quivering slightly with the motion of the aircraft being readied for departure. The two passengers in 1C and 1D leaned in just enough to show they were listening. "This is how air travel should be," Richard declared, switching between English and French with a smoothness born from years of boardrooms and banquets. No noise, no fuss, certainly no screaming children. His smirk deepened on the last phrase. as though the mere concept of a child in first class was a clever joke only he understood. The man in 1C chuckled obligingly. The woman in 1D, draped in silk, gave a little tilt of her head and a smile that said she knew this wasn't polite, but enjoyed the shared transgression. The flight attendant, Sophie, was making her way down the aisle with the drinks cart. She had perfected the art of moving in the narrow space without seeming hurried, each bottle and glass aligned with a precision that suggested control. She reached Richard's row just as the woman in 1D gestured toward his glass. "Another for my friend," the woman said, "so he can finish his story." Sophie's professional smile flickered. She poured, the fizz rising like an obedient tide. As she set the fresh glass on Richard's tray, her eyes caught movement from further down the aisle. Marco, the young man in the denim jacket, had leaned slightly out of his seat in economy, catching her attention as she glanced past the curtain. He mouthed something, then repeated it more clearly. 1A belongs to the girl. For the smallest fraction of a second, Sophie's eyes hardened. She didn't respond. Instead, she pushed the cart forward with a smoothness that could be mistaken for grace, but was in truth avoidance. She'd already decided, whether she admitted it to herself or not, that the confrontation was over. The cabin's peace, or at least the appearance of it, mattered more than correcting the wrong. Her tablet buzzed softly on the top of the cart. It was a system notification from the airline's secure app. VIP minor on board. Protected protocol. The line was highlighted in amber, the kind of flag that was meant to pull a crew member's attention immediately. Sophie read it, tapped to acknowledge receipt, and then, with a subtle swipe, dismissed it from the screen. The glow of the message vanished, leaving the tray table's sheen and Richard's champagne as the brightest things in her world. Richard swirled his drink gently, eyes narrowing with a kind of private pleasure. The bubbles chased each other upward, breaking at the surface in soft sighs. He pulled his phone from the inner pocket of his jacket. The device woke to a lock screen of a Mediterranean coastline, all sun-bleached stone and glittering water. He opened an app not common to the casual traveler, a green icon with no label. A few swipes and taps later, a chat thread appeared. At the top, a contact name, Argent. He typed quickly, thumbs moving with a familiarity that suggested this was a language he spoke fluently. On board now. In 1A, perfect view. More later. He hit send, then locked the phone and returned it to his pocket, the motion seamless enough that anyone watching would think he'd just checked the time. The man in 1C was asking about Richard's business in the States. Negotiations, Richard said, with the deliberate vagueness of someone who wants to be asked again. Big contracts, big players. He sipped his champagne, the glass catching the soft light and reflecting it in a golden crescent across his cuff. Up in the galley, Sophie stowed the drinks cart. The notification she'd cleared still echoed in her mind, though she tried to bury it under the muscle memory of service routines. Her training manual had been clear. Protected protocol meant not just discretion, but priority, especially if the passenger was a child. She thought of Emily's face, those wide eyes holding the ticket. She thought of John Carter, calm and deliberate in a way that didn't match the defeat she'd chosen to read into his actions. But she pushed the images away. Richard was telling another story now, this one about a night in Monaco when he'd been mistaken for a famous Formula One driver. The woman in 1D laughed in a way that was half disbelief, half performance. Every gesture Richard made seemed calculated to occupy the space around him as completely as possible, as though the air was an extension of his property. In economy, Marco was still watching the curtain to first class. He'd seen Sophie read something on her device, seen her swipe it away. He couldn't know the exact words, but he recognized the kind of selective blindness that came from deciding a problem was too much trouble to solve. He tapped his phone again, saving the screenshot of the seating chart to a hidden folder. A few rows behind him, Evelyn sat with her notebook open, pen poised but unmoving. She'd caught fragments of Richard's voice carrying back, enough to understand the shape of his arrogance. She glanced toward the back of the plane, where Emily sat quietly by the window. Ticket now tucked into the seat back pocket like a pressed leaf. Evelyn's pen moved. The seat you take says less about you than the seat you give up. Sophie returned to first class with a tray of warm towels. She placed one on Richard's armrest, another for his companions. The scent of citrus and steam curled upward. She noticed the man in 1C scrolling on his phone, his screen bright with a messaging app that wasn't in English. The edges of her professional smile tightened. She'd been on enough international flights to know the rhythms of discreet communication, and these passengers fit the pattern. Still, she said nothing. Richard leaned back, eyes half closed, as if savoring the anticipation of takeoff more than the journey itself. The cabin lights shifted subtly, signaling the approach of departure. The engines began their low, expectant rumble. Down in the back, Emily traced a finger along the edge of her armrest, following the curve like it was a map. Her father sat beside her, eyes closed but posture alert, as though listening to something deeper than the drone of the engines. He didn't need to see the man in 1A to know what was unfolding there. He could feel it, the way you can feel a change in the air before a storm. In first class, Richard lifted his glass one more time. "To quiet skies," he said, and drank. The words landed like a toast, but in the larger story, they were just another line in a chapter that was about to turn. The aircraft had just begun its slow crawl toward the runway when the change came. Not dramatic, not announced, but felt. A subtle reduction in thrust. A tightening of the body, as if the plane itself had reconsidered its next move. The forward motion eased, then curved, wheels grumbling in a wide, deliberate arc. Emily felt it first in her seat. The faint shift that made the view out her small economy window lean differently. The lights of the taxiway blurred slightly as the nose swung, pointing back toward the terminal. She pressed her forehead closer to the glass, the cool surface grounding her as her eyes followed the movement outside. The tarmac, dotted with service vehicles and reflective cones, began to look more crowded. Beside her, John Carter opened his eyes without changing his posture. The adjustment in direction was unmistakable. Pilots did not abandon their place in the takeoff sequence without cause, not in a tightly choreographed airport like Charles de Gaulle. Up in first class, Richard set down his champagne with a faint frown, the kind you give to minor inconveniences. "Technical delay, I imagine," he murmured to the woman in 1D, who tilted her head in idle agreement. Around them, other passengers began to notice the change, shifting in their seats, glancing out windows. Then the voice of the captain came over the intercom, calm, but carrying a weight that told those listening this was no routine adjustment. "Ladies and gentlemen, we've been advised of a situation requiring us to return to the gate. This is a precautionary measure. Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened. We appreciate your cooperation." The phrasing was deliberate. A situation and precautionary were words chosen to keep panic at bay while still leaving room for imagination. Emily's eyes widened. She didn't know exactly what a situation meant in the language of airplanes, but she could feel the cabin's mood shift, from the low simmer of earlier tensions to a sharper, more alert curiosity. People who had been lost in their phones or magazines now peered through the windows, scanning the darkness beyond the glass for answers. As the plane rolled closer to the terminal, the lights outside began to multiply. Blue and red strobes reflected off the fuselage in sharp pulses. Vehicles moved into formation along the taxi lane. Airport security trucks, a fuel service van hastily pulling aside, and farther ahead, a dark sedan with its hazard lights flashing. In the galley, Sophie was securing loose items when a flicker of movement caught her eye. Just inside the terminal entry, near where the jet bridge would align with the aircraft door, a man in a dark blazer stood with a tablet tucked under one arm. He wasn't in uniform, but his stance was too precise, his stillness too purposeful. She recognized the type. Plainclothes security, the kind whose authority didn't need a badge on display. The man stepped forward, boarding pass in hand. He scanned it once, then spoke briefly into a discreet earpiece. Sophie caught a glimpse of the name. Duval, Richard. The security officer's eyes narrowed slightly, and he murmured something she couldn't hear before giving a single, deliberate nod. Her stomach tightened. She turned back to the passengers, her smile intact, but her breath shorter. She knew the look of a situation that was no longer under the crew's control. Emily's gaze tracked the movement of flashing lights as they fell into place around the aircraft. She didn't understand why the sight made her heart beat faster, but she could sense the energy in the cabin changing. It was like the moment before a thunderstorm when the air goes heavy and the birds disappear. John noticed Sophie as she passed through the aisle. For the first time since boarding, there was a crack in her composure. Not enough for most to see, but enough for him. Her eyes slid past him too quickly, her shoulders tight as she moved toward the front. In first class, Richard had resumed his air of mild amusement, though his glance toward the window lingered a beat longer than before. He picked up his phone, checked the screen, then slipped it away when he saw Sophie approaching. "Everything under control?" he asked, as though it were her personal responsibility to guarantee it. "Just a short return to the gate, sir," Sophie replied, her tone bright but thinner than she intended. Behind her, in the galley jump seat, another crew member received a call through the internal handset. He listened, nodded once, and his eyes flicked instinctively toward 1A before he hung up. Emily pressed her palm against the glass, watching a convoy of airport vehicles move into a tighter circle. She didn't know that such a maneuver was rare outside of emergencies, but she could tell by the way her father's attention sharpened that this wasn't standard. The aircraft slowed to a crawl. The dark sedan reached the jet bridge connection point and stopped, its hazard lights casting an amber rhythm onto the concrete. The plainclothes officer from earlier had stepped onto the tarmac, speaking into his radio while watching the plane approach. Sophie returned to the galley and adjusted the interphone volume. She could feel her pulse in her fingertips. The VIP minor on board notification she dismissed earlier was now a stone in her pocket. The protected protocol wasn't just a suggestion. It was a chain of procedures designed for exactly this kind of intersection between passenger safety and operational authority. She had chosen to step aside. Now, watching the choreography unfold outside, she wondered if she had stepped aside from the wrong side of history. The captain's voice came on again. "Cabin crew, prepare for arrival at gate." It was a phrase heard often enough, but rarely this soon after departure from the gate. In the economy cabin, whispers began to rise. Questions about connections, about delays, about what could be important enough to turn a plane around before takeoff. Marco glanced back toward Emily and John. The girl was still watching the window. John, though outwardly calm, had the bearing of someone marking every moving piece on a chessboard. When the aircraft finally aligned with the jet bridge, the parking brake engaged with a muted thud. The seatbelt sign stayed on. Outside, the sedan's doors opened, and two more plainclothes officers stepped out, joining the first. One of them looked up toward the first-class windows, scanning with the precision of someone confirming a target. Emily turned from the window to her father, her voice barely above a whisper. "Is this because of us?" John met her gaze, the corner of his mouth lifting in a way that was both reassurance and confirmation. "Not because of us," he said, "but it will matter to us." Outside, the officers began moving toward the aircraft door, their formation deliberate, their pace unhurried but inevitable. Inside, the air shifted again, passengers leaning into the moment without realizing they were leaning at all. Whatever had started in silence was about to speak. The forward door of the aircraft opened with a faint rush of pressurized air, followed by the creak of the jet bridge settling against the frame. Conversation in the cabin thinned to a hush, replaced by the quiet expectancy of passengers trying not to look like they were staring. From the doorway, a man in a fitted black vest stepped into the cabin. He wasn't airline staff. The cut of his clothing, the polished black shoes, and the calm focus in his eyes marked him as something else entirely. The small earpiece tucked discreetly under one ear confirmed it for anyone paying close attention. His footsteps on the carpeted aisle were soft but deliberate, heels pressing into the floor with the steady rhythm of someone used to being listened to without speaking. The man didn't stop in first class, didn't exchange glances with Richard Duval or the other startled passengers up front. He walked past the curtain, into business, then economy, his eyes scanning without haste. Every few steps, someone shifted in their seat to make room, the way people instinctively do when they realize the person approaching isn't there to serve drinks. Emily heard the sound of those footsteps before she saw him. It was a different kind of sound than the crew made, more measured, each step like a punctuation mark. She looked up just as the man stopped beside her row. He inclined his head toward her father, his voice low but carrying. "Mr. Carter," he said, the name both greeting and acknowledgement. Then he turned to Emily, his expression softening. "Miss Carter, my apologies for the inconvenience you've experienced." The words were simple, but the formality in them made the surrounding passengers sit up straighter. It wasn't the way an airline official would apologize. It was the way one diplomat might address another. John Carter returned the nod without rising. "No harm done," he said evenly. The man stepped back just enough to address them both. "We've had to return to the gate due to a potential security breach. Your cooperation is appreciated." His gaze shifted briefly to Emily, as if to assure her she was included in the circle of understanding. Up the aisle, passengers began to murmur. A man 2 rows ahead leaned toward his companion. "Did he say breach?" The word passed down the cabin like a ripple, each repetition softening but not erasing its weight. The agent's voice dropped a fraction lower, enough that only John and Emily could clearly hear the next part. "Special envoy protocol is active. You'll remain on board until we've confirmed containment." Emily didn't know what special envoy meant, but she saw the subtle reaction it drew from her father, the smallest tightening of his jaw, the briefest flicker in his eyes. Whatever it wasn't news to him. The agent straightened, giving a final respectful nod to Emily before turning back toward the front. He didn't hurry, but his return path carried a new tension, like a current running under calm water. In first class, Richard had half risen in his seat when the agent passed the first time, only to sink back when he realized he wasn't the destination. Now, as the man reappeared, Richard's eyes narrowed. He shifted his phone in his hand, thumb hovering just above the screen. The agent stopped at the galley and spoke briefly with Sophie. She tried to maintain her composure, but the blood had drained from her face. Whatever he said was short, but it made her glance instinctively toward Richard's seat before looking away. A second agent had boarded while the first made his way down the aisle. This one, dressed similarly, moved less like a messenger and more like someone inspecting the scene. He carried a small handheld scanner, no larger than a paperback, and paused near row 1A. He held it close to the seat's armrest, the device emitting a quiet chime. Then he checked the cabin's surveillance alignment before making a note on his tablet. Richard tried for a polite smile when the agent's eyes met his. "Is there a problem?" he asked in a tone meant to sound casual. "We're just verifying a technical matter, sir," the agent replied without elaboration. His gaze lingered for half a second on the phone in Richard's hand before moving on. By now, the whispers in the cabin had turned into a subdued hum. Passengers speculated in undertones. Technical fault, VIP movement, maybe even a medical emergency, but no one seemed entirely convinced by their own guesses. In the back, Emily leaned toward her father. "Is this because of the seat?" she asked quietly. John's eyes stayed on the agent at the front. "Not exactly," he said. "Something bigger." And then, like a slow curtain lift, the first layer of truth emerged. Not to the entire cabin, but to the man who mattered most in that moment. The agent in the black vest returned to John's row, crouched slightly to speak at a level that carried just to him. "We have evidence of unauthorized access to the passenger manifest," he said. "The breach included protected identities, yours and hers." He didn't gesture to Emily, but the implication hung heavy. John's gaze sharpened, though his voice stayed neutral. "Internal or external?" "We're still determining," the agent replied. "But there are indications it may have been facilitated from inside." His glance flicked again toward first class, so brief it could have been mistaken for nothing. "For now, remain seated. We'll isolate the source." Emily, though she couldn't grasp every word, could tell from the shift in her father's posture that something serious was in play. The earlier slight about the seat seemed to have faded into the background, replaced by a thread of concern she hadn't seen before. The agent rose, gave another short nod, and moved forward again. The murmurs in the cabin swelled briefly as passengers craned to see where he went, then fell back into that watchful quiet that had settled over the flight. In the galley, Sophie busied herself with a tray she didn't need to arrange. Her hands moved automatically, but her thoughts were elsewhere. Back to the VIP minor on-board notification she'd swiped away, the one that now felt like a flashing warning she'd ignored. John leaned back in his seat, one hand resting on Emily's armrest. "Sometimes," he said softly, almost to himself, "the reason we're stopped isn't the reason people think." Emily tilted her head, unsure if she was meant to answer. Outside, the flashing lights on the tarmac continued their steady rhythm, and the aircraft remained tethered to the gate like a story paused mid-sentence. Somewhere forward, just beyond the curtain, a conversation had begun, low-voiced, precise, and about to change the direction of the flight for everyone on board. The man in the black vest had only just stepped past the curtain when the first ripple began. It was Marco who started it, not intentionally, but with the kind of quiet urgency that draws ears without trying. He leaned forward to the row ahead, his voice pitched just above the engine hum. "You see that guy?" he asked the couple in 37A and 37B, jerking his chin toward the aisle where the agent had passed moments earlier. He went straight to that man and his daughter, called him Mr. Carter, apologized to her like she was royalty. "I checked the manifest earlier. She's the one who's supposed to be in 1A. The man in 37A blinked, then angled his body to look down the aisle toward Emily. She was sitting quietly, ticket no longer visible, but her poise in the cramped seat seemed at odds with the way most children handled travel delays. The woman beside him leaned close to her husband and whispered something he didn't quite catch. A row over, Evelyn had her notebook open again, though she wasn't writing. Her eyes were on Emily, watching the way the girl studied the view outside as if the flashing lights on the tarmac were part of a show only she understood. Evelyn had seen enough power plays in her career to know one when it was unfolding, even if the stage this time was the narrow aisle of an aircraft. She thought of the moment earlier when she'd chosen silence over action, when she'd let Sophie's weak defense and Richard's smug defiance pass without a word. The memory felt heavier now, the weight of complicity pressing against her ribs. She told herself there would be a time to correct that, and when it came, she wouldn't miss it. Up front, Sophie's voice came over the crew intercom, summoning her to the forward galley. She arrived to find the lead purser waiting with one of the agents. The purser's expression was unreadable, but the agent's eyes were sharper, measuring. "Ms. Laurent," the agent began, using her last name like a formal address. "We're reviewing an incident involving a VIP protocol breach." Sophie swallowed. I'm not sure what." "You received a push notification about a VIP minor on board," the purser interrupted, her tone controlled but edged. "Did you follow the protocol?" Sophie's hands tightened around the edge of the service counter. I just wanted to handle it quickly. We were still boarding. Tensions were..." "That's not what I asked," the purser said, her voice low but direct. The agent took a small step closer. "We have body cam footage from the moment in question," he said. His hand touched the small device clipped to his vest, barely noticeable to most passengers, but to Sophie it suddenly seemed enormous. "We've reviewed it. Your actions will be part of the report." Her throat felt dry. She nodded once, the gesture stiff. "Understood." The agent's gaze didn't soften. "The footage is clear. The child had a valid boarding pass for 1A. The passenger who took her seat refused to move. You offered no enforcement." Sophie's mouth opened, but no words came. She could see it now from above, as the camera must have seen it. Her posture angled toward Richard, her voice dipping into appeasement instead of authority, the way she'd guided Emily away without insisting on the seat she was entitled to. In the moment, it had seemed efficient. Now, it looked like surrender. In economy, the quiet buzz of speculation continued to build. Marco's whisper had passed to the next row, then the next, until even passengers halfway up the cabin were leaning into small, tight-lipped conversations. Every retelling added a detail, some imagined, some accurate, but the core remained. The girl in the back had been wronged, and someone important knew it. Evelyn closed her notebook, decision solidifying. She would speak to the girl before the flight was over, whether in apology or solidarity. The image of Emily standing by that seat, ticket in hand, was too sharp to fade. From her seat near the rear galley, Emily noticed the increased glances in her direction. She didn't feel threatened by them. They weren't the sharp, assessing looks Richard had given her, but softer, almost curious. She leaned toward her father. "Why are they looking?" John didn't look up from the small spiral-bound notebook he'd been pretending to read. "Because people like to connect the pieces of a story," he said, "even if they don't have all of them yet." "And do they have all of them?" she asked. He smiled faintly. "Not even close." In the forward galley, Sophie was dismissed from the brief without any promise of resolution. She stepped back into the first-class cabin, her professional smile reattached but strained at the edges. Richard gave her a look of mock sympathy. "Everything all right, mademoiselle?" "Just routine," she replied, moving past him without pausing. But the weight in her chest told her this was anything but routine. Back in the rear cabin, Marco glanced again toward Emily and caught her looking back this time. He offered the faintest nod, an acknowledgement, a quiet signal that someone else on this plane had seen what had happened and wasn't going to forget it. Emily returned the nod, small but steady. The agents remained mostly invisible to the passengers, but their presence was felt in the way the crew moved, in the occasional murmured instruction, in the moments when the normal choreography of departure was interrupted by stillness. Somewhere, a list was being checked against reality, and somewhere else, someone was realizing they'd been caught inside that reality. John closed his notebook and slid it into the seat pocket. "You'll see soon enough," he said quietly, more to himself than to Emily. And around them, the cabin settled into a tense waiting, the air carrying the residue of decisions already made, but not yet revealed. The aisle seemed narrower when the agent in the black vest returned. His pace was unchanged, steady, deliberate, but the energy in the cabin sharpened, like a string drawn taut. Conversations thinned again, passengers leaning subtly toward the aisle without meaning to. He passed the curtain into first class, eyes scanning the rows as if confirming a mental list. Then he stopped beside seat 1A. Richard Duval looked up from his champagne with an expression of polite impatience, the kind he might give a waiter taking too long to bring the bill. "Mr. Duval," the agent said, voice even but carrying, "I need to ask you a few questions." Richard's brows lifted slightly. "Of course. Is this about the delay?" He gestured vaguely toward the window, where the staccato flash of security lights still danced across the fuselage. The agent didn't answer directly. Instead, he nodded toward Richard's phone, which lay screen up on the armrest. The display was still glowing, an app open, its interface clean, no branding, just a string of timestamps and message previews in blocky encrypted font. "Would you mind locking your device for a moment?" the agent asked. Richard's fingers closed over the phone, but not before the agent's gaze flicked to a line of data. A sent message time-stamped within 2 minutes of Emily being removed from her seat. "That's a private matter," Richard said smoothly, though his grip on the phone had tightened. "I understand," the agent replied, still calm. "However, our internal systems registered an external ping to the passenger manifest database at precisely the same time. That database contains travel details for all passengers under protected protocols, including minors." The surrounding seats had gone still. The man in 1C had stopped pretending to scroll his phone. The woman in 1D's silk scarf shifted against her shoulder as she turned to listen. Richard gave a small laugh. The sound edged. "Surely you don't think—" "We're not drawing conclusions at this stage," the agent interrupted gently. "But we do need to confirm whether your device was used, knowingly or otherwise, as a relay point." The phrase seemed to hang in the air. Relay point. It wasn't an accusation of theft or hacking, but something subtler, being part of a chain, whether you built it or just happened to hold it for a moment. Richard leaned back, trying to reclaim the space between them. I receive messages from many associates. I can't be responsible for every byte of data passing through my phone. That's exactly what we need to determine, the agent replied. He pulled a small, flat device from his vest pocket, a scanner similar to the one his colleague had used earlier. He held it a few inches from Richard's phone. A soft tone sounded, followed by a flash of data on the agent's wrist display. Behind them, Sophie lingered just within earshot, her expression caught between professional neutrality and personal unease. She had served this man champagne minutes after escorting Emily away, and now the air between them felt charged with something she hadn't anticipated. The agent straightened, tucking the scanner away. Mr. Duval, at this time I'm going to ask that you remain seated and refrain from using any personal devices until we've completed our review. Richard's jaw tightened. Is that an order? It's a request, the agent said, his tone still polite but firm. One that carries the weight of operational security for this flight. The man in 1C finally broke the silence. What's this really about? His voice was curious, but the undercurrent was clear. He wanted to know whether he was sitting next to trouble. The agent's answer was measured, just loud enough for the first few rows to hear. We have reason to believe that an external party attempted to obtain sensitive travel details for passengers traveling under VIP minor protocols. This flight was one of the targets. A ripple moved through the nearby passengers. In the second row, someone whispered, like kidnapping. The word made the woman in 1D flinch. The agent didn't confirm or deny. Our focus is on ensuring that no further data leaves this aircraft, he said, and on understanding how the breach occurred. From the back of the plane, John Carter could see only the agent's shoulders and the stillness of Richard's posture. But it was enough. He recognized the choreography, soft containment, public enough to signal consequence, private enough to avoid escalation. Emily, watching him watch the front, shifted in her seat. Is that the man? She asked quietly. Yes, John said. And now, he's part of a bigger problem than he realizes. Richard, for all his cultivated ease, was processing something different. He understood now that the seat dispute was a small storm cloud compared to the front that had rolled in behind it. The encrypted app still open on his phone was connected to a group that prided itself on information stunts, feeding selective leaks to media outlets to embarrass corporations, governments, and in this case, an American airline. Whether he had meant to trigger the manifest query or had simply been a convenient node didn't matter. The agents would treat him as the link they had in hand. And if he were honest with himself, the thrill of sending that 1A message to his contact Argent had been too tempting, too performative. The agent gave a final nod, then stepped back, positioning himself just far enough away to give Richard space while still keeping him in a clear line of sight. Another plainclothes officer took up a quiet post at the curtain, effectively sealing the first-class cabin from casual movement. For the passengers watching, the scene had shifted from mild curiosity to a kind of hushed fascination. This wasn't just about a rude man taking a child's seat anymore. It was about something larger, something with edges sharp enough to cut beyond the confines of the plane. Sophie turned away, retreating to the galley, her mind replaying the earlier scene at 1A. The ticket in Emily's hands, the smirk on Richard's face, her own voice choosing expedience over fairness. Now she knew there had been more at stake than dignity alone, and the knowledge pressed heavier than she expected. Emily looked out the window again, but her reflection showed her father's expression, calm, unreadable, but alert. So, what happens next? She asked. John didn't answer right away. That depends on whether they think he's just careless, he said finally, or something else entirely. The cabin seemed to hold its breath. The tension pooled around seat 1A like a spotlight no one had switched on, but everyone could feel. The forward curtain parted once more, and this time two agents appeared together. One was the man in the black vest who had spoken to Richard earlier. The other wore a dark suit, his tie understated, his expression polite but immovable, the kind of politeness that closes doors. "Mr. Duvall," the suited man began, his voice even but pitched so that the entire first-class cabin could hear. "We'd like you to accompany us off the aircraft to continue our conversation in a more private setting." Richard's champagne glass trembled slightly as he set it down on the tray table. He didn't stand immediately. Instead, he glanced around, as if searching for someone to object on his behalf. No one did. "This is unnecessary," he said, trying for the same easy confidence he had worn earlier. "I've done nothing wrong." "We're not making accusations, sir," the man in the vest replied. "We're asking for your cooperation." The repetition of asking was deliberate, the sort of phrasing that left no room for refusal without making it sound like an arrest. Richard exhaled sharply, then rose. The moment he did, the atmosphere in first class seemed to shift from stillness to a strange density, every gaze sharpening, every breath held just slightly longer. There were no cuffs, no raised voices, but the weight of the moment was in the silence. As he stepped into the aisle, a woman in 1D instinctively leaned away, her silk scarf catching the light like a nervous gesture. The man in 1C moved his knee just enough to clear the path, eyes averted. Around them, subtle movements carried volumes, passengers straightening in their seats, a camera phone discreetly lowered before it could be noticed, a magazine lifted as a shield but not read. The agents flanked Richard without touching him. It wasn't necessary. Their presence was enough to make the aisle feel narrower, the distance to the door longer. In the galley, Sophie stood rigid, tray in hand. She'd thought she was prepared for whatever might happen next, but watching Richard's confident posture collapse into something smaller and tighter was unsettling. Her earlier decisions replayed in her mind with a clarity that felt like indictment. She avoided Richard's eyes as he passed, but his glance caught her anyway. A fleeting look, unreadable except for the faintest edge of accusation. Richard's shoes thudded softly against the carpet as he moved toward the exit. Behind him, conversations in first class resumed in hushed tones, the sound like ripples returning after a stone is pulled from water. Down in economy, passengers craned for a glimpse through the aisle, the brief flash of a suited shoulder, the unmistakable air of someone being escorted. Marco caught the image and stored it. Not for a social media post, not yet, but because some moments demand a witness. Evelyn, seated only a few rows ahead of Emily, turned slightly to watch. Her expression was not triumphant. It was complicated, tinged with the awareness that while justice might be unfolding, it rarely arrived without cost. Emily, small hands gripping the folded ticket in her lap, felt the shift in the air before she saw Richard. The back of his head appeared first, then the line of his shoulder, then the whole figure moving down the aisle toward the door. She didn't feel the swell of satisfaction some might expect. Instead, she felt puzzled, and somewhere beneath that, a thread of sympathy she couldn't quite explain. John noticed her grip tighten on the ticket. "What's on your mind?" he asked softly. "I thought I'd be happy," she said, watching Richard's retreat. "But he just looks sad." John's gaze followed the departing figure. "Sometimes," he said, "when someone loses the part of themselves they've been showing the world, it's hard to watch, even if they've earned it." The agents paused at the doorway to let a ground crew member pass, then guided Richard onto the jet bridge. The door closed with its usual thud, but to the passengers left behind, it sounded like a final punctuation mark. Sophie exhaled, realizing she'd been holding her breath. Her hands trembled slightly as she stowed the tray. She wasn't sure whether she was shaking from relief, from guilt, or from the proximity to a drama that had unfolded just beyond her control. Up in the cockpit, the captain received a quiet confirmation through the interphone. The breach investigation would continue on the ground. The flight would be cleared to depart once the agents completed their statements. In the cabin, the murmurs began to swell again, no longer about the delay, but about the meaning of what they had just seen. Marco glanced toward Emily, catching the subtle way she loosened her hold on the ticket. Evelyn did too, noting the absence of smugness in the girl's expression. Emily's eyes lingered on the closed door for a moment longer before she turned back to her father. "Do you think he'll be okay?" she asked. "That's not for us to decide," John said. "But I hope he learned something from it." Her gaze dropped to the ticket in her lap. She smoothed its edges with her fingers, careful not to crease it. It didn't feel like a prize anymore. It felt like a reminder of the moment she'd been told to move, of the people who had noticed, of the way the story had grown into something bigger than just her seat. Around them, the engines began their low, steady hum again, a sign that the journey was back on track. But the cabin carried the aftertaste of what had happened, a mix of vindication, unease, and the quiet hope that such a thing wouldn't repeat itself. The aircraft door was sealed again, and the hum of the engines returned, steady and familiar. Yet in the forward galley, the atmosphere was far from routine. The captain had called for a quick, closed-door briefing with the lead purser, the 2 security agents, and the senior members of the cabin crew. They stood in a tight semicircle, voices kept low but firm. One of the agents spoke first, his tone clipped, professional. "We've reviewed the timeline and the body cam footage. The VIP miner protected protocol was clearly in place and triggered before boarding. It was acknowledged on the crew system, yet it was not acted on." The purser's lips pressed into a thin line. "Sophie received the notification," she said, glancing toward the younger attendant. It was dismissed without escalation. The agent's gaze landed on Sophie. "We're not here to humiliate anyone, but protocol exists for a reason, and ignoring it exposed a child to unnecessary vulnerability. That's not a clerical error. That's a procedural failure." Sophie's face flushed, her voice coming out uneven. I just wanted to avoid a scene. We were behind schedule, boarding was tense, and..." She hesitated, the next words sticking like burrs. "And Mr. Duval was in the lounge earlier. He tipped me, generously. He said he appreciated discreet crew members. I didn't think..." "You didn't think it might influence your decision?" the purser asked, her tone sharper now. Sophie's eyes flicked to the floor. "I'm on probation," she admitted, voice small. "I've only been flying for 3 months. One complaint from a high-value passenger could..." The agent interrupted, voice cool but not unkind. "Fear of upsetting someone powerful is not an excuse for neglecting someone vulnerable, especially when that someone is a minor under protected status." There was a beat of silence in the galley. The words seemed to echo in the narrow space. The purser straightened. "Sophie, you'll be removed from duty at the next crew change and placed on temporary suspension pending investigation. HR will contact you formally." Sophie nodded quickly, though her eyes were glassy. "Understood." It wasn't defiance. It was resignation. The sound of someone who had known this was coming from the moment the agent first spoke her name. The captain shifted the focus back to procedure. This is not just about one incident. If the system can be ignored this easily, it will happen again. And next time, the consequences could be worse. One of the agents offered a solution without ceremony. "We'll be filing a recommendation to headquarters for mandatory retraining on VIP miner protocols across the network, and not just the checkbox version. We want situational drills, decision pressure scenarios. We're calling it Dignity First." The purser's brow furrowed. "You mean a full-scale module?" "Yes," the agent said. "With clear emphasis, the passenger's dignity is non-negotiable. First-class seat or economy. Protocols apply, and staff are empowered to enforce them without fear of repercussion from important customers." The idea settled into the group like a seed on fertile soil. No one spoke for a moment, but the undercurrent was clear. This was more than damage control. It was a chance to turn a single flight's embarrassment into a systemic correction. In the rear of the plane, oblivious to the galley's conversation, Emily sat tracing the airline logo embossed on her ticket. She didn't know the specifics of protected protocols or training modules, but she could sense something shifting. The glances she caught from crew members now were different, more deliberate, as if she had become not just a passenger, but a measure against which they were quietly assessing themselves. Evelyn noticed too. She watched as a junior attendant, passing by, paused just long enough to check on Emily's comfort without speaking. It was a small thing, but Evelyn recognized the pattern. Change often starts as a quiet adjustment before it becomes policy. Back up front, Sophie stood apart from the group now, leaning against the jump seat, hands clasped tight. She replayed the lounge encounter in her mind. The easy way Richard had spoken to her, the folded bills slipped under his cup, the casual remark about keeping things smooth for people who pay for it. At the time, she'd taken it as flattery, maybe even encouragement. Now it tasted sour, like a test she had failed without realizing it was one. The captain wrapped the briefing with a firm reminder. We leave this gate once the report is logged and the route re-cleared. But make no mistake, this incident will follow us into the training rooms. We either fix it here, or it'll happen again to someone who can't afford to be overlooked. The agents exchanged a glance that carried a certain finality. They had done their part for now. The rest would be up to the airline's internal machinery. As they dispersed, the words "dignity first" lingered in the air. Not yet a program, not yet a policy, but a clear direction. A mirror held up to the system, asking it to look at itself without flinching. Emily shifted in her seat, leaning toward her father. Are we going soon? Yes, John said, offering her a small smile. And maybe, when we do, things will be a little different for the next kid with a ticket like yours. She nodded, not fully understanding, but liking the sound of it. Outside, the runway lights glimmered in steady lines, waiting for the plane to take its place among them. The cabin had quieted into that pre-departure lull again. A strange calm after the series of interruptions. The engines purred at low power. The overhead lights dimmed to a warm glow. Emily sat with her ticket folded neatly in her lap, her legs tucked slightly to the side, eyes on the dark sweep of tarmac outside. From several rows ahead, Evelyn rose slowly, steadying herself against the seat back in front of her. The motion drew only a few glances, most passengers assuming she was headed for the lavatory. But when she reached Emily's row, she stopped. For a moment, she simply stood there, her hand resting lightly on the top of the aisle seat. Her gaze moved from Emily to John, and back again. Then, with a quiet inhale, she spoke. I owe you an apology, Evelyn said, her voice low but firm enough to carry to the nearest rows. I saw what happened when you boarded. I should have said something. I didn't, and I'm sorry. Emily blinked, caught off guard. She wasn't used to adults, strangers especially, speaking to her like that. Her fingers tightened on the ticket. John's eyes met Evelyn's. He didn't wave the apology away or offer a quick, "It's fine." Instead, he inclined his head in a deliberate nod, the kind that acknowledged weight rather than deflecting it. Emily's voice was soft when it came. I'm okay, ma'am. She meant it, not because the morning hadn't hurt, but because the sting of it had been met with something more than silence. Evelyn's expression eased, but she didn't step away. Sometimes, she said, we think staying quiet is the safest choice. I've made a career out of knowing when to speak and when to hold back. But today, I realized silence can be its own decision, and not always the right one. John tilted his head slightly. You were a journalist. It wasn't a question, more an observation drawn from the way she measured her words. I was, Evelyn confirmed. 40 years in the field. My last big piece was an op-ed called Silence is Still a Choice. It got some attention back then. She gave a small, rueful smile. Apparently, I still need reminding. There was a pause, a quiet space, in which the weight of her words seemed to settle on all three of them. Emily looked up at her father, unsure whether she should say more. Evelyn glanced down the aisle toward first class, now missing one of its earlier occupants. I don't believe in shouting for the sake of it, but I believe in putting something on the record. When we land, I'm going to write a letter to the airline, not to make a scene, not to get headlines, just so this doesn't get lost in their paperwork." John's eyes softened. "A letter with your name on it will go further than you think." Evelyn nodded, then looked back to Emily. "And maybe one day, you'll write your own." Emily considered that, her fingers smoothing the edge of the ticket. "Maybe," she said, the corners of her mouth lifting just slightly. The older woman stepped back, giving them a last nod before making her way slowly back to her seat. For a while after she sat down, Evelyn stared at the blank page of her notebook. Then she began to write, not in the terse, inverted pyramid style of news copy, but in her own voice. She started with what she had seen. A child standing beside a seat that was hers, an adult refusing to move, a crew member choosing expedience over justice. She described the look in the girl's eyes, not tears, but confusion, and the moment that look changed when someone addressed her with respect. She didn't write about Richard's removal in sensational terms. She didn't name him, didn't speculate about the encrypted messages or the agents. Her focus was narrower, but sharper. The quiet failures that can happen in plain sight and the responsibility of those who witness them. The title came last, drawn from her own admission earlier in the aisle. Silence is still a choice. She underlined it once. Back in Emily's row, John leaned toward her. "You handled that well." Emily shrugged lightly. "She seemed like she really meant it." "She did," John said. "And sometimes that's worth more than anything else you could get from someone." Emily looked toward Evelyn, who was still writing. In that moment, she understood, at least a little, how words could be more than sounds. They could be actions. The intercom chimed, pulling the cabin's attention to the captain's voice. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your patience. We've been cleared for departure." The sound of seatbelts clicking back into place followed, along with a low murmur of passengers settling in. As the plane began its slow pushback from the gate, Emily folded her ticket one last time and slipped it into the small pocket of her backpack. It wasn't a souvenir, exactly. It was something she knew she'd keep. Proof of a seat she'd been denied, and of the people who'd chosen, in different ways, to give some of it back. Evelyn, pen still moving, didn't notice the shift in motion until the engines roared slightly louder. She glanced out the window, then back to the page, her jaw set. She would send the letter within 24 hours of landing, not for drama, but for the record. Because records, she knew, outlast moments. And somewhere, in the quiet exchange between an older woman, a young girl, and the man who sat between them, a different kind of protocol was being written. One not stored in an airline's manual, but in the minds of the people who had been there. The engines rumbled steadily now, the long interruption behind them, but the cabin still carried the aftertaste of what had unfolded. Conversations were softer, glances more measured, as though everyone had silently agreed that this wasn't the kind of flight where you laughed too loudly. From the forward galley, the man in the black vest reappeared. He paused at the curtain, scanning the cabin with a calm, neutral expression. Then he stepped aside to make space for John and Emily. "Mr. Carter," he said, voice low but audible to the nearby rows, "your seats are ready." Emily blinked up at her father, then at the agent. She hadn't expected this. She clutched her folded ticket tighter, as though it might vanish if she loosened her grip. John rose smoothly, offering her his hand. She slid out from the economy row and followed him up the aisle. The path felt different this time. No crowd pressing forward, no jostle of boarding passengers. People leaned back in their seats to let them pass, and though no one clapped or spoke, the silence was not cold. It was respectful. When they stepped through the first-class curtain, the agent guided them to seats 1A and 1B. The leather cushions gleamed under the overhead light, and the folded blanket on Emily's seat looked as if it had been placed there just for her. She hesitated before sitting. Her eyes flicked to the window, then to the seat number etched discreetly into the frame. 1A, the same number she had carried in her hands all day. Now, finally, it matched the space she was in. John took his seat beside her. He didn't say, "There you go," or "Told you so." He simply nodded once. The kind of nod that said he'd known this moment would come, but on its own terms. The agent leaned in slightly. "If you need anything at all, let us know immediately." Then he stepped back and returned to the galley, his presence lingering like the memory of a closed door behind which safety waited. Emily ran her fingers over the armrest, tracing the smooth line of the leather. The hum of the cabin felt different up here, quieter, the air almost softer. She placed her ticket gently on the tray table, unfolded it once more, and smoothed it flat. Elsewhere in the aircraft, change was already being written into policy. In the airline's operations office, a charter message was being prepared for distribution to all crews. Effective immediately, all crew members are required to prioritize the safety and dignity of vulnerable passengers, particularly those traveling under VIP minor status. The message went further. It announced the creation of a 10-minute hotline, direct access for any crew member encountering a "you don't belong here" dispute in seating or cabin access. The line would be staffed 24/7 by senior operations managers with authority to override on-the-spot decisions. The draft charter didn't mention Flight 482 by number, nor did it describe the specifics of what had happened. But everyone who read it in the coming days would hear the story in some form, from crew lounge whispers to social media's fractured memory. Near the back of the plane, Marco was still scrolling through his phone. He had debated for the past hour whether to post the clip he'd captured, a quiet, 1-minute video showing a small girl standing by a first-class seat, ticket in hand, eyes wide but dry. There was no name, no face close enough to identify, just the image of the ticket never leaving her grip. He typed a caption. She held the ticket the whole time. Then he hit upload, sending it to a private account with a modest following. He didn't expect it to go far. He just wanted it somewhere other than his camera roll, somewhere it might remind a few people that the details matter. Back in 1A, Emily glanced at her father. "Is it okay to sit here now?" "It always was," John said. "Now everyone else knows it too." She smiled faintly, then looked out the window. The tarmac lights slid by as the plane began its slow taxi toward the runway. The curtain to first class swayed gently with the motion of the plane. Behind it, passengers in other cabins returned to their own thoughts. But a few kept glancing forward, as though needing to see that she was still there. Sophie passed quietly through the aisle, her expression unreadable. She paused for a fraction of a second near Emily's row, then moved on without speaking. Whether it was regret, relief, or just professional habit, no one could say. The safety demonstration began again, the crew's voices calm and measured. Outside, the engines deepened to that unmistakable pre-takeoff growl. Emily rested her head lightly against the seatback, the folded ticket still within reach on the tray table. For the first time that day, she let her shoulders drop. Not in victory, not in defiance, just in the quiet acceptance that this was where she was meant to be. John glanced sideways at her, then at the aisle, then back to the runway lights beyond the window. He knew that long after the wheels left the ground, this flight would leave another kind of trail, one made of small decisions, visible and invisible, that had bent toward justice in the end. The plane turned onto the runway, engines rising in a steady roar. The nose lifted, the ground fell away, and the lights below blurred into ribbons. Emily kept her eyes on the horizon until the cabin leveled, then closed them for a moment, holding on to the stillness of the seat beneath her. Somewhere in the digital ether, Marco's clip began its slow climb into timelines and group chats, carried by the kind of quiet outrage that doesn't burn out quickly. And somewhere in the airline's headquarters, the final draft of the charter was being signed for immediate release. In 1A, the folded ticket stayed on the tray table, untouched, until Emily finally slipped it into her backpack, a small rectangle of paper that had carried her through more than just a flight. The runway lights stretched endlessly ahead, twin rivers of gold spilling into the night. From her window seat in 1A, Emily watched them flow past, each lamp flashing in rhythm with the plane's gathering speed. The hum beneath her feet deepened into a vibration she could feel in her chest, and then, with a smooth lift, the ground let go. For a heartbeat, the cabin tilted into silence. No clink of glasses, no shuffle of service carts. Only the weightless sensation of climbing into the dark. Emily's eyes stayed fixed on the lights below as they blurred into threads, winding away into the distance. Beside her, John sat steady, watching the horizon rather than the ground. His posture was calm, but there was a trace of something softer in his gaze. Satisfaction, perhaps, or simply the quiet relief of knowing this flight was no longer a compromise. In the cabins behind them, passengers settled into the reality of a night crossing. Some opened books, others closed their eyes. Yet, beneath the normal rhythms, there was a subtle shift. People found themselves recalling the earlier hours, not just the confrontation, but their own roles in the silence that had surrounded it. Evelyn had returned to her seat, but not to rest. Her notebook was open again, the page now filled with careful lines. She'd already decided that her letter to the airline would not be a complaint, but a record. It would name no villains, offer no sweeping judgments. Instead, it would draw attention to the moment a child stood holding a ticket and was told, without words, she didn't belong. And to the people who decided, eventually, that she did. She chose her phrases like a jeweler chooses stones, turning them to catch the right light. The tone was firm but unhurried, designed not to provoke defensiveness but to plant a seed. She signed her full name at the end, a name that still carried weight in the right circles. At the airline's headquarters, in a quiet office far from the noise of the tarmac, the newly drafted Dignity First program was being stamped for global implementation. Within weeks, every flight attendant in the network would undergo training that treated moments like Emily's not as inconveniences, but as defining points in the passenger experience. Emily, unaware of policy drafts or corporate directives, simply leaned her forehead against the window. The Atlantic spread out below, a vast darkness flecked with the occasional pinprick of another aircraft's lights. Somewhere ahead, the edge of night was breaking, the faintest silver glow where sky met water. She thought of the seat in economy, of the way people had looked at her after she moved, of the stillness in the aisle when she and her father had been led forward. She didn't think of it as a victory. It felt more like something that had been set right. Not because she fought for it, but because enough people had decided it mattered. John glanced at her. "You're quiet," he said. She shrugged. "I'm just thinking." "About what?" Emily tilted her head slightly, watching the first streak of dawn stretch across the horizon. "That maybe winning doesn't have to be loud." John smiled faintly. The best wins usually aren't. As the sky brightened, thin clouds caught the sunlight in pink and gold. The water below reflected a pale shimmer, turning the ocean into a mirror of the morning. The cabin lights dimmed further, letting the natural light take hold. Evelyn closed her notebook, her letter finished. She didn't know exactly when she would send it, perhaps upon landing, perhaps after a day's thought, but she knew it would be read. And perhaps, somewhere down the line, it would make another crew member pause before telling someone they didn't belong. In 1A, Emily's hand rested lightly on her ticket, now tucked into the seat pocket. She didn't need to hold it anymore. She knew it was hers. The knowledge sat quietly in her chest, steady as the hum of the engines. The flight pushed on over the Atlantic, dawn rising ahead. No applause marked the moment. No announcement called it out. Yet, in its own way, the aircraft carried more than passengers. It carried a new standard, one forged in the unspoken agreement that some things are worth protecting without fanfare. And in that hush, high above the ocean, the truth of it settled. The silence that comes after doing the right thing is stronger than any argument that tries to justify doing otherwise.